Welcome to Dr. Horta. Join with me in a program that will look at the collection of sustainable dark Greek greens called Horta. They're free, they're clean, and they're truly organic. Join us in this wonderful journey. In order to collect wild Greek greens, you need two things. You need a very sharp knife, and you also need a basket. The preference for the basket is that once you put the Horta in there, they tend not to break up and not to break over. So the best option is a sharp knife and a basket which you can collect. I can also tell you that the best place to collect Horta in Melbourne are places where the soil has been turned over, and in winter. It is in winter where these wild Greek greens tend to grow best, not in summer. Today we're about 30 kilometres north of Melbourne in a spot which meets all the criteria for the collection of Horta. It has wet soils, muddy soils, and sun, and that allows for Horta to grow easily. In this particular spot, there tends to be one particular variety which is more dominant, but we also see in other areas there are 2 or 3 other types of species. Horta is a peasant food. It's a food that is free. Most people in Greece and in other parts would collect it from mountaintops, would collect it from gullies, would collect it from places where it's damp. In particular, the food was particularly important during the war when there was very, very little available. Many Greeks, particularly in the wet winters of the occupation, were able to live off these very humble plants which provided a degree of nutrients and filled the bellies of many people. And as we said, this is very much a peasant food. They only require lemon, olive oil, and a bit of salt. This is an example of a bresa. As I was growing up, my understanding of what my parents would call it was bresas, but there are many, many different varieties of these. Here is an example of one. As you can see, the leaves are generally fairly green, dark green. The darker they are, the more sugars they have. That means they've had more sun. One way of identifying and having a better sense of the Horta that you've picked and whether it's ready or not is looking at the base, and as you can see, it doesn't have a lot of rings around it, which basically means that the plant is fresh and it's new. And these are 2 examples of Horta. Again, they belong to the Bresas family. As you will see, this one here is far more greener and has less spikes on it. They're not necessarily spikes as such. They're similar to a nettle. They don't hurt your hand, but don't worry about them. This one is a bit older and it has similar little spikes on it. Once you boil them, they're fine and there's no issue, in the same way that nettles don't prick your tongue and so forth. When you attempt to cut Horta, your knife must go deep under, and the reason for that is to make sure that you cut the entire plant. You turn the plant over, you remove the base, which in Greek is called agouli, and you remove any leaves that appear to be outdated or old. And you can tell basically by feeling. So the harder they are, the rougher they are, the older they are. Within certain plants around this time, you'll also find sprouting. The sprouting is good. It indicates that the plant is young. You can remove a lot of the leaves by simply cutting that open, dropping the leaves and cutting the base. And the reason why I've put a slit in the base is it will allow for the hot water to penetrate deeper in what we call the wouli in Greek. Here's an example of an exceptional bresa. Look at the size of it. It's clean, it's smooth, which means that it's rather fresh now in winter. You can also see that it's got an element of redness in it, which means that this particular species has a greater sugar content, as we see. We'll turn it over. By turning the plant over, we get a better indication of its age. As you can see here, it's not that old. There's one small ring, but nothing more. There is also, as we peel back some of the leaves, some sprouts. Now these are exceptional and we should keep them whenever we're collecting agriorchota. So here's an example of a very, very green shoot, which means now with the rains in the middle of winter and the sun, the plant is not only expanding on its own, but it's also expanding internally with more shoots. So as you pull back these leaves, which are still too hard, you will see that the plant has shoots, and these are excellent example of you just throw them in the pot and they're ready to go. Again, when we look at this plant, we chop off the edges, and because it's a large one and you can see the shoots, to boil it, we cut it once there and we cut it there again. And this, as we said, is called the wuli in Greek, and this is a very excellent example of a very large bresa that in many respects needs to be cut up into a couple of pieces to make sure that it boils a bit better. This is the outcome, 3 baskets, 1 hour's work. This is food that will last at least a week. You can have at least 1 meal a day to feed 4 people. No cost, no expenses. The remainder that you clean can go into the compost bin, and when we go home to cook them and clean them, you see we can also use the boiled water once it goes cold to fertilize our garden plants. We're at the cleaning stage at the moment. As you can see, most of the wild Greek greens here are actually large, so we cut them from the base, which we talked about, the wuli, and then we start removing the outside leaves, which are much older, and what that will reveal is a number of small shoots. As you can see, we keep those and we place them in our basket for boiling later. We continue this process until we get to the base when there's no further shoots, as it is now. As you can see, it's clean. We cut the edges because they're the older leaves. We know we're going to put them in the pot. We cut it in half so the hot water can penetrate. And as you can see in here, this is an excellent example of a recent agriorchota or a green coming out. There's yellow. There's green shoots coming out. We're at the phase now that we're washing the plants. We need to place it in cold water, very cold water as much as possible. You shake the plants to release the mud. If, for example, you think that there are some bugs, what you can do, you can put 2 teaspoons of salt, and what the salt will do, it will kill off any bugs and they'll come out. Once you allow this and you leave it for about a half an hour, you take the plants out, you put it in a bucket, and the water you don't throw, but you take it and you put it on your home plants. One thing that I need to point out about these wonderful plants is that they're fairly fibrous. So in terms of digestion, they're exceptional. In terms of scraping the inside and removing any debris, removing any fats, they're fantastic. So there's an example of the fibers in there. And you can also eat the end of it. It's like salad. It's got a sweet, peppery taste. Now we've reached the final stage, and the final stage involves the boiling. As you can see, it's a large pot that's disproportionate amount of water. In the same way that you cook pasta, you cook the dark green horta. Make sure that there's more water as well, otherwise they won't cook. So slowly you take a handful, you drop them in, you take another handful, you drop them in slowly. You can leave them there and they can blanch, or you can cook them. Given that these are fairly tender, you can leave them for about 40 minutes and switch the water off and they can blanch. But today what we're going to do, we're going to boil them just to speed up the process. So that completes them. I let them drop on their own for a minute or so. And then I take this olive-based wooden spoon, push them down. They go fully in, so remember there must be more water, must be disproportionate amount of water to the dark green plants. The only way that we will know if they're ready is we'll take the lid, we'll check it in about 20 to 25 minutes. If it goes soft, we press it, that means that they're ready. We don't want to overboil them, we want to keep them at a point that they've also got a slight crunch. We've finished the last phase, the cooking has taken place now. The wild greens are ready. It's just taken just under 15 minutes, which means that they were extremely tender at this time. We know that they're ready. One, the colour is still dark green. When you leave them in the water, you can see that. But more importantly, the leaves, the stems, a lot of them are fairly translucent. But more importantly, the wuli, the base, if you press it with your finger, breaks down, which means they're ready. Now we'll take them out and place them in a large bowl. Now we've reached the point that the wild greens are in the large plate. In order to drain the excess water, we elevate it on top of the wooden spoon. We leave it for about 5-6 minutes. The water will drain and then we simply drain the water out and then we can serve. Now that we've drained the wild greens, we can also remove the spoon, and just one more time we can let the excess water go. And there's virtually very little. We now move to the last and most important and delicious part. We place lemon. At least a lemon for this. This will feed at least 4 people. It's a very simple food. It's a very humble food. And it's a very nutritious food. We've put some lemon juice, at least 1 lemon. It will feed 4 people. But we're also putting plenty of olive oil. The olive oil is from Greece, from the village of Rodama near Sparti. Don't skimp on the olive oil. It joins this food and it's a perfect complement to it. The final thing that we do is we put salt. And once we do that, the final thing is just to mix them a bit and turn them upside down. And as you can see, the colour is still fairly dark green, which means we've probably blanched them more than cooked them. And these are ready now to be served. Welcome, we've joined now at the last phase, which is the eating phase, the most important. So this is the byproduct of a day's out. And what we have which accompanies it is some very, very simple accompaniments. We have olives from the village of Rodama. Once again, we have feta cheese, we have bread which is homemade, and I've also added some extra olive oil because I'm a bit of an olive oil fanatic to at least saturate it, and with it is homemade Greek wine. Let us go to the taste test. I would say it's no exaggeration that the taste is spectacular. Remember, this food is sustainable, it's organic, and above all, it's free. Thank you for joining us.